Kwapwiran kuling nija. Murdich maman. Jinang. Kaya. Kaya. Wanju. Wajak. Nyunga. Buja. Kaya. Hello, everyone. When we do a welcome to country, it's about welcoming you to the land where we are on. And this happens to be Wajak, Nyunga, Buja. We are one of 14 Noongar groups that belong to the Noongar nation, which covers the southwest of Western Australia. But we are here in Wajak country, in the metropolitan area, and I am one of the traditional custodians, along with my grandson Trice, who is playing the yidaki, or the didgeridoo. So when we welcome to country, it's also about you, when you are visiting from overseas, to be welcomed to one of over 750 different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups within Australia. So when we welcome you to country, this is about ensuring your safety and your health whilst you are here visiting our land. I will speak to you in the ancient language of Noongar, but then I will also translate so that you can understand what I'm saying. And whilst we do this welcome to country, I would like to take you on a journey around the metropolitan area. Come with me and listen and imagine where you are going. Wanju wanju, maman ngunis, yogas jukan, Budias jenangang. Nija wajak nyunga buja. Mort jenang, jenabiri, jena. Waranka nija, ngambi nija. Bulabarap jenang, nunakandak nyin kar, nganin kep jenang. Mudich. Hello and welcome here to Wajak Buja. Our ancestors have walked this land for many thousands of years. They have left their footprints in the dirt, and the dust flies as they have danced and sung and told the many stories that belong to this land. There have been tears of sadness, but also tears of happiness. They continue to sit around the campfire, telling the many stories of this land in language, and also to share their food and water, just as you have done before this event. Nija nunakandat yining ne borlu, madagarap, karagarap, jinangang bow nija, karakumba, nija durbal yirigan, walilap, wadaran, wajama, durbal nara jinang, meander, nija waliabap, bi jinang, dalgara, karamurda, mandun, jundala, nija nunakan borlu. I've just taken you around the metropolitan area. Let's see if you know where we've been. You are sitting here in Borlu, in the capital city, Perth. Behind you, there is Mardigara, a very special women's birthing place in the past, the birthplace of Fanny Balbuck, one of our very early women. She was not only born there, but she is the only woman who has a statue that stands in the grounds of Government House. So very first, special for her. We then travelled down the Durbal Yerrigan, or the Swan River as you may know it. And we see Borlu, Perth here, on the right-hand side as we're travelling west. We then go past this place called Cardigara, so special for Noongar people. It's also known as Karakumba and Jinangang Bo. When we say Jinang, it means that you are looking a long way. So all of these places that I've mentioned can be seen from Cardigara. You might know it as Kings Park. We travel down the Swan River. We go past the Noongar place of Joondalup and continue on our way to Wollullup, Fremantle. We then cross the ocean and we come over to this little island that sits over there by itself. You might know it as Rottnest Island. And we need to share the truth-telling stories about that place. The place of rest for some of our Aboriginal men across Western Australia. And they are still there today. And only next month there will be a huge healing and sorry ceremony. And that will be a very first for this place. We then travel down to the Derbil Nurra, the Coburn Sound. Now in the Noongar seasons of Birak and Bunuroo, these are the two summer seasons, many of us, not only Noongar people, but all of the community, love to go jibber-jobbling, nija, carol, jinang, jiljit, nganing, what? They go hunting for the fish, the crabs, the lobster, and we love to go swimming, of course, along the coast in those summer months. We then go further down to Meandip. Meandip, where could that be? It's on the border of Wajak and Binjarab country, a very special island that is known as Garden Island, and it is a part of the dreaming story, the creation story between Wajimap, Wollullup and Meandip of Yondok, the spiritual crocodile, and Waggle, the spiritual serpent, of how they fought and created all of those waterways in between. We then leave Meandip and we come back to Beer, the suburb of Beerlia. Why? Because the Noongar word for fresh water is beer, our drinking water that flows underground, that nourishes the land, the people, the plants and the animals. We then travel to Jalgarra, the Canning River, before we see this beautiful expanse of the Black Hills, known as Karamura to Noongar people. You might know it as the Darling Ranges. We then come to Mandun, along this place, the place of many trees, which is around the Midland and Guildford area, before we go up north to this place called Joondalup. Notice I said 2 Joondalups. The Noongar place of Joondalup at Point Walter is where the lady with the long white hair tangles the children in her hair and take them up to become stars in the sky. And then there is Joondalup, and there is still a connection with that story from Joondalup to Wave Rock. Jiralak, Kongalak, Marawarak, Nija, Jinang, Boyalak. From the north to the south, the east to the west, this is Wajak country. And of course, Noongar Bona Jinang. We actually have 6 seasons here in Noongar country. We already spoke about the 2 summer seasons. Excuse me. Today we are in the season of Camberang, the season of new beginnings, of birth. So at this time of the year when you're out travelling, have a look for those little swans with the parents and waddling along, and all the little ducklings. Nija, the birds, Kulbadi the magpie will swoop you at this time of year because they are looking after their young in the nests. So this is the time also of buoy, the little turtles crossing the roads around where the freshwater lakes are. So this is the season of the young. And it's also Kwandong season, I might add. So I'm, for one, will be out there looking to see where these beautiful native peaches are. Kalyakul, Jinang. We must think about that sustainability. When we say Kalyakul in Noongar, we are looking at the past. We're here in the present, but we also need to look to the future so that there is a sustainable future for our children and grandchildren, because they too need to keep telling the stories of culture, the land and the language. So, for those of you that are visiting, so whilst you are visiting, keep safe and healthy whilst you are here. You are welcome. Yanka. Thank you. Yiriki Jinam. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin and Trice, for that hugely generous welcome to country. Reflecting on the topic of this evening's presentation and Robin's reflection of the tens and thousands, ten thousands of years that the Whadjuk people have cared for this country. The topic tonight also reflects caring for country as the demands around energy are going to be changing. But the point I particularly wanted to make was that in doing so, we need to work closely with Indigenous people in ensuring that how we deploy these changes that we need to make is done respectfully and in consultation with Indigenous people everywhere. My name is Mark Ogden. I'm the Provost Chancellor of the Faculty of Science and Engineering at Curtin, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all here to 137 St George's Terrace. I will also say I'm here on behalf of Professor Peter Ashworth, our Director of the Curtin Institute for Energy Transition. Peter has directed much of this event from Calgary, which is a remarkable piece of remote ops, and working with Eleanor and the 137 team to get this together. And I'm just delighted to see such a full room this evening put together at such a last minute. So I'll be your MC. I have a few people to welcome. Councillor Karen Harrington, Deputy Shire President, West Arthur. I didn't get a chance to chase down Karen, so I don't know for certain Karen's here. There's a wave, great. Councillor Tracy Lefroy, Shire President of Mora, there. I believe we're on a promise for lots of questions from you, Tracy, I'm told. Jessica Shaw, Parliamentary Secretary to the Premier, Minister for State and Industry Development, Jobs and Trade, Public Sector Management, Federal State Relations in the Cook Labor Government, and Member for Swan Hills. That's a very large business card. Professor Peter Klinken, our WA Chief Scientist. Peter's been the Chief Scientist since 2014 and has been reappointed 4 times. So we're going to make full use of his tremendous wealth of knowledge and expertise in this role when he joins us for the Q&A session later. And of course, Henrik Stiesdal, our special guest, who I will introduce in more detail in a moment. Right, before we get underway, I have to do the general housekeeping. In the event of an emergency, please exit through the doors that you entered with. There's a couple of staircases to exit through, as well as an elevator to bring you to the ground floor. In the case of a fire, do not use the elevator. The muster point is a long way away south, and I won't read it all. In the event of emergency, follow the staff, please. It's out, it's across, it's down by the convention centre on the grassy area down there. Which is a long way away. Bathrooms are located just straight out there if you need them through either of those doors. And I think that's all the logistics. So, the Curtin Institute for Energy Transition, in collaboration with the University of Western Australia's Oceans Institute and the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation, is delighted to host Henrik Stiesdal for this special forum on the technological acceleration of the green transition. First up, it's my pleasure to invite Jessica Shaw to make some comments. I won't repeat Jessica's long title again, but I will say Jessica was a senior commercial executive in the energy industry for over a decade before she joined Parliament. Her early career was in foreign affairs and trade as political and economic attaché to the British High Commission and for the Australian Senate's Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee. So please, Jessica.
Kaya Wanju, I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet this evening, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I always really enjoy Robin's welcomes. I love the story that she paints of our beautiful home, and it really contextualises it and makes you reflect on the place names that we so very often take for granted. I think, Mark, your comments are quite right about the need to engage First Nations as we develop or as we go through the energy transition. But the other thing that I think it's imperative that we do is ensure that the benefits are also shared. And that is imperative that we do that. There will be changes to landscapes, there will be changes to the relationships made right the way across the state as we do transition. And it represents an extraordinary economic opportunity for us and for First Nations people in terms of meaningful, high-value jobs that can also maintain a connection to country, which is, of course, so very important. It's a genuine pleasure to be with you this evening. Energy transition is quite literally my reason for being. I did work in the energy industry for a decade before I ran for Parliament. In my first term of Parliament, I chaired the Economics Committee. We did a major parliamentary inquiry into distributed energy resources, which led to wholesale reform to the Western Australian energy market, so we could not just accommodate, but again, take advantage of the opportunities presented by all sorts of different distributed energy technologies. And we really are the most progressed jurisdiction, certainly in Australia. But when I travel overseas and talk to our colleagues in many other places around the world, I think we're one of the greatest jurisdictions in the world in terms of the research that's going on into how these technologies integrate into our grids, how we structure our markets to accommodate them, and then how we accommodate all the engineering requirements that are prompted by the increasing penetration of renewable energy technologies. It raises significant questions for us about how we structure our markets, how we ensure the interaction between the different asset classes. You can't have an energy market or an electricity market in Western Australia without being very aware of the gas market implications and the way that gas assets are increasingly being called upon to perform, to provide the sort of network stability and reliability that we need. These are all complex issues, and we certainly had a look at those in the first term of Parliament. And of course, for the last 2 years, it's been my great pleasure to be the Parliamentary Secretary to Premier Cook in his capacity as Minister for State and Industry, Development, Jobs and Trade. And certainly the work that I do for the Premier is 100% focused on energy transition matters. And I do hope that many of you had the opportunity to attend the Energy Transition Summit that the Premier convened in October of last year. It was the first significant gathering that he convened when he became Premier, and he very clearly articulated to the West Australian community that the energy transition is the cornerstone of his economic agenda. He is passionate about this. There is a lot to do. There's a lot going on within government, and there is so much more to be done. But let me give you the assurance that this Premier, more than any other Premier this state has ever had, takes energy transition seriously, is investing and putting the resources of government behind it. But if it's one thing that my experience in government and also in industry and working very closely with academia as well, if it's one thing I've learned from that, it's that neither government nor industry nor academia can do it alone. What we need is to work harder than we've ever worked before, but to work together in ways that we've never worked together before, because the challenges are real, but the opportunities are immense, and they are there for the taking if we have the ambition, if we have these hard conversations about accelerating the move towards green transition. It was my great pleasure today to host Professor Klinken, my very good friend, and also to host Henrik as well for a very detailed conversation, which perhaps was a bit of a precursor to a lot of the things that you'll talk about this evening. Well, what we covered was, as I say, the enormity of the challenge, the fact that we've got to muster resources in ways we've never mustered resources before. We need more raw materials, we need more engineers, we need more planners, we need more heritage specialists, we need more market specialists. We've got to do this in a compressed time frame. We have to do in the next 20 years what mankind has achieved in its entire history in terms of developing what will be the largest machines in the world. We have to do this together. The thing that I would observe as well from today's conversation is we have to learn from one another. And one of the things I enjoyed the most about our conversation today was about hearing Henrik's incredible journey. He is one of the founding fathers of wind power, and the journey that he went on from an idea about creating a wind turbine and speaking with a friend of his down the road who was an engineer and had some ideas on how you could put this together, further along ago than I've been alive for. But what a remarkable journey to then go and head Vestas and to then work with Siemens and to be responsible for the rollout of wind power right the way across the planet. Others have trodden these paths before, and the challenge before us is to learn and to work together. So I'm really looking forward to listening to the conversation this evening. Thank you for making yourself available and visiting us and sharing your knowledge. And yeah, no pressure, but I'm looking forward to a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jessica. I don't think there could have been a better job done to outline the opportunities and the challenges that lie in front of us here. So that's, yeah, thank you very much. So I will now introduce Henrik for the main event. I have some bio I'm going to read out here. I would usually have checked it with you, but you have a half an hour to correct me whenever I say anything wrong. So Henrik's been described by the Australian ambassador to Denmark, Norway and Iceland as the godfather of the modern wind industry. He's been instrumental in shaping the wind energy and climate mitigation industries in Europe and has many lessons to share about accelerating the energy transition globally and the key considerations for both a European and Australian context. And we can hear some of those conversations were happening at lunchtime today. As well as his significant experience in the wind sector, Henrik is also the inventor of the Skyclean pyrolysis carbon capture technology for agriculture, which turns organic byproducts from agriculture, forestry and industry into biochar and bioenergy, another really significantly interesting area. Clearly, Henrik has considerable insight to offer West Australian industry and government. Just to underline the understatement of considerable insight, as Jessica said, Henrik led the installation of the world's first offshore wind farm in 1991 and holds over 1,000 patents. So I will be returning for a Q&A session after Henrik's presentation with Professor Peter Klinken, but for now, please welcome Henrik to the floor for his presentation.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Of course, I'm not the godfather of the wind industry, but a lot of people were involved. My main claim to fame in this respect is that I'm the last man standing, if that is worth anything. I'm going to speak about global warming and what we do about it. It is really bad. This is how the global temperature is increasing. The red is land and the blue is the sea. It's going bad. Summer of 22, we had 48 degrees in Spain, in Sevilla. They never had that before. The Po River didn't want to be a river anymore. It's the lifeline of North Italy. So people are missing it. Forest fires in Europe that we had never had before. And it's man-made, and it's all about fossils. So I think this is a lot of scratching. Just a second. I think it's about my pen and my glasses and the microphone having some sort of intercourse. It's mainly about fossil, somewhat about agriculture, but it is about fossil, and it's man-made. If you ever hear people say, oh, it's sun, solar spots or whatever, forget it. It's man-made. We have made the problem. The International Climate Panel has made various scenarios, and I can never remember what the numbers are, but there are ways that the world could act with regards to managing the threat. So what a scenario has is the total temperature increase composed of the temperature increase from CO2, from non-CO2 gases like methane, and some negative from reforestation and so on. We could be on the far left with a temperature rise of 1.4 degrees this century. Could be at number 2. We are on this one here. 2.7 degrees temperature rise is our present trajectory. That's what the world has not consciously decided to do, but that is what everything indicates. 2.7 degrees means half a billion climate refugees, people who can't stay where they and their families lived maybe for thousands of years. Either because it gets to be too hot to live there, or because they are flooded. There's an uncertainty band in all of those. We might land up at 3.5 degrees. Then we speak a billion climate refugees, not people like us. We are the rich part. We will not relocate other than on our own reason and purpose. It's all the poor people. But they will affect us and our children very, very heavily. And it is a bizarre paradox, because the whole world knows the problem. The whole world knows that Syria and North Korea are the only countries that have not signed up to the Paris Agreement. Can I say you don't know? Can I say that you don't know how to tackle it, and yet we do something different in big parts of the world? And this is kind of our conundrum. A large part of it is what is called the tragedy of the commons. That when the climate is everybody's, it's also nobody's. Why should we do something? I come from a country that emits 0.1% of global emissions. Why should we do anything? That's part of it. And part of it is also the growth in Asia. The green curve shows the emissions from Asia. In 2021, Asia emitted 110% of the rest of the world put together, because we exported a lot of our production to Asia, and also because of rapidly growing populations, not in China, but in Southeast Asia. And when we look at this problem, I sometimes think of this analogy. I didn't make the drawing. I'm not that good at drawing, but imagine we are a group of people owning an apartment block, and the block gets on fire. We stand out on the street. We have a fire hose. We have a siphon. We can get the water, and then we decide, what do we do now? And then one person says, are we sure it's on fire? I know there's some smoke, but could it be something else? Could it maybe not be about us? Another one says, it's not my apartment, I don't care. My apartment is not burning. And the third one says, you want to put it out with water. Are you aware of the cost of water? I mean, can you imagine what we'd pay? We'd pay several $100s to put it out. And the fourth one says, you know, I heard about somebody who's creating new solutions that would be much smarter than water. They'll be ready in 10 or 20 years. Shouldn't we just wait for that? And somebody says, are there regulations about water use? We may be able to get a permit in 3 or 4 years. And all the while, our children are in the house. That's how it sometimes feels when you are discussing climate change and what needs to be done. The more specific issues are, firstly, that people believe you can't rely on renewables because there isn't always wind, there isn't always sun. That's a fallacy. It's of course true that there's not always wind or sun, but we have plenty of technologies available to store electricity, both in batteries for short duration, in hydrogen, ammonia, and other materials for long-term storage. We might even choose to use natural gas for brief periods of lack of energy. It would be much better than not relying on the growth of renewables. The other one is too expensive. We can't afford it. In most of the world, renewables are now cheaper than fossils. In some countries it is not. Kazakhstan, natural gas is bubbling under your feet. There renewables can't compete, but that's why I say they are always affordable. There's no country in the world that could not transition if they wanted to. And the question about cost, this is from CSIRO, or however I put it, the consultation draft that came out in December. This is the cost of electricity. The lowest cost that is firm is with wind and solar PV. Firm renewables, including the storage cost. Who is that? I mean, who can say that just because they are advisors to the Australian government? I mean, come on. But this is the naked truth. Renewables with firming is cheap, and it's certainly affordable. I think we should aim for a new energy system that is based on renewables. A new energy system like this may look complex, but it is not particularly complex. There are 3 resources: wind, sun, and biomass. There are 4 conversion technologies: wind power, solar PV, biogas, and pyrolysis. 3 downstream treatments. And then a modern society can get everything that it wants, not only on energy, but also to a large extent on materials, because methanol is a precursor of almost all kinds of plastics and so on, medicine, what have you. And there's a hierarchy. Everything that can be electrified must be electrified, simply because it's the most efficient and cheap way of doing it. Not everything can be electrified. What cannot be electrified, we can serve with hydrogen, for instance. Hydrogen is a way to get high temperatures, higher temperatures than you can get with electricity, and there are large parts of the industry that need fuels to get to high temperatures. You can't make temperatures over 1,000 degrees with heating elements. They won't last. Hydrogen is an annoying gas because it doesn't want to become a liquid. It shares that characteristic with helium. All other gases are friendly enough to become liquid when we put on enough pressure, not so hydrogen. But we can convert it into ammonia very easily by using nitrogen from air. And ammonia is easily compressed to a liquid, and then is easy to store and transport. And it's the basis of all fertilizers for agriculture, and is actually also an excellent fuel. If we can't get away with that, we can make methanol by combining electricity with green carbon from biomass. Methanol, the precursor of sustainable aviation fuel, plastics, what have you. And we can also just take biogas and pyrolysis to give us gas and oil. With those three resources, we can do everything. And the trick is, the fancy thing is, none of them are new. We don't have to develop anything new. It all exists. Some of them are not fully industrialized, but most of them are. And we have everything that we need. We have everything we need. The only thing we don't have is time. If you take this slope, our temperature in 2100 will be 3.75 degrees, not the 2.7 we spoke about. We don't have time. It's the only thing we don't have. That's why, as Jess said, we need to collaborate to get the green transition accelerated. Because otherwise we will run out of time and we will pass triggering points with melting of ice and so on that we shouldn't have done. Even small states, and here I take the liberty to consider Western Australia population-wise as a small state, can make a difference. Denmark played a role in creating the modern wind industry. We now abate about 3.5% of emissions in the whole world with wind power. I would have liked it to be 35%. But we are increasing by maybe 0.5% every year, and soon it'll be with 1% per year. More than 99.9% of all the world's wind turbines are either delivered from Denmark or from Danish companies, or according to the same example. Not through industrial espionage or things, but just because we were lucky enough to set the best practice very early on. We are 0.07% of world population. It could be really fun if 10 years, 15 years down the line we could say, and by the way, the next in line was Western Australia, who did ABC. You have all the cards in your hand. These are wind resource on the left, solar resource on the right. The wind resource stretches out into the ocean for good reasons. You have a wind resource that is in the upper 10% of the world. You have a solar resource that's in the upper 5% of the world. If ever anybody was blessed with resource, it's here. For me, maybe a little due to jet lag, but I get a little dizzy about standing here in a country or in a state that has those resources. To take one example, and I'll have this available to you if you are interested. We don't have time to go through the calculation, but I did a calculation last night when I prepared for this. The whole world uses about 27,000 terawatt hours of electricity. Yeah. Astronomical figure, you can't relate to that. It requires 12.3 million megawatts of solar power. You can do that in Western Australia, absorbing 6% of Western Australia area. Western Australia could, in theory, produce 16 times the whole world's electricity consumption if we covered it all by solar panels. We won't do that. We won't even cover 6%, but your resource is just fantastic. You could produce, with a hybrid solar and wind, 70% solar, 30% onshore wind, ammonia at about $650 per ton. Today's world market price for green ammonia is about $900 per ton. So you really have the cards on your hand. One of the things you could do with green hydrogen is to do direct reduction of iron ore. Iron ore is essentially a mineral together with iron oxide. So the iron is always oxidized. Can't use it as an oxide. The way you get it to be useful is to heat it in a high oven together with coal. And the coal actually also provides the heat. What then happens is that carbon in the coal has much more appetite for oxygen than the iron has. So what comes out is iron that lost its oxygen to carbon and goes out as pure iron, and carbon that got the oxygen from the iron and goes out as CO2. 5% of global emissions come from iron making. You could replace the carbon in the shape of coal with hydrogen. Hydrogen has an even bigger appetite for oxygen. But by using hydrogen, what comes out besides the pure iron is not CO2, it is hydrogen, 2 hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. We tend to call that water. So we have on our hands the means to maybe make you a country that has the value add of iron ore instead of just supplying the raw material to ship it to China or wherever. This is how such a furnace looks. That would be a 30 megawatt test unit. There is no such unit now. There are test units, but there is no such commercial unit yet. As far as I know, you could be an early mover and then have options available. You could work, instead of blast furnaces, you could do hydrogen, 10 gigawatts for a mine, 240 gigawatts for Australia. Or you could do the pyrolysis we'll be speaking about in a minute. You have about 7.5 million tons of agricultural residues. That could save 7.5 million tons of CO2, much less than the iron adventure. But going into other region partners, do something about the microphone, just a second. Oops. Maybe it should just lie in the pocket. So let's see here. Hello? Yes, check. It could move carbon sequestration and carbon abatement, this sound, into agriculture, which I think would be highly appropriate. How does one make big things happen? How could you do that? And there, the experience from the wind industry in Denmark is, in my world, is kind of like a way one does things. The first prerequisite is that the government wants something to happen. It did that in wind power. Still does. It would like wind power to happen. Without the government being interested, it won't happen. If the government wants it to happen, it can make it happen. The way it makes it happen is to create a demand for things. Very often we speak supply and demand. That's how we phrase it, supply and demand. It is the other way around. It is demand that leads to supply. And what they did in Denmark back in the late 70s, early 80s, is that they introduced a mechanism by which there was a subsidy, by which the utilities had to take the electricity from wind power, and by which the wind power owners got a decent price for their product, electricity. That created a demand. Once there was a demand, you say, I actually like, is there anybody who could sell a wind turbine? And then supplier A came and said, I can do that, I've got a good machine. Supplier B came and said, I've got one that's better or bigger or whatever. And then that led to competition. Competition leads to industrial innovation. Innovation brings down cost, and then you are in a positive spiral. And then we had some subsidies and good links with research, but the long-term frame conditions is what makes things happen. Can it be done? Yeah, we have all the technologies. We can afford it. We could use this simple success story. I come from a simple country. Even our successes are simple. We use that simple thing to demonstrate the new energy system. Is it really that easy? No, it's not that easy. We have many considerations. You have your own challenges related to vested interests. There will be people who like fossils to remain in place. And we also have the interest of First Nations, biodiversity and ecology and so on to respect. But in my view, I've never been in a place that had better cards on the hand than here. Then a little bit about what I do myself. When I look at this here, I've been looking at it saying, are there things that could be done faster, given that we don't have time? You do something in relation to wind power, not wind turbines, but wind power in relation to hydrogen and in relation to pyrolysis. And for that, I've created a company, a relatively small company. After my long tenure in wind, I now am involved with a small company, about 130 people, who do new technologies in climate change mitigation. And our buzzword, our mantra is industrialization. This is the first example of industrialization of big equipment. Before this, people had industrialized typewriters and sewing machines and telephones, but the Model T car from Ford was the first big piece of equipment that was done industrially. And it changed looks a little over time, but the internals were the same, because Henry Ford was obsessed with standardization. This is how the price went down over the years. Very famous study from 1958. So it's the 1958 plot you see here. Everything corrected to $58. When they had done 15,000 cars, the selling price was about $3,300. At 100,000 cars, 2,500. At 1 million cars, 1,500. At 8 million cars, less than 1,000. Same product. They must have thought on the way, now we can't do it any better. Now we are there. They were the first to do 1 million pieces. Yes, we are kings of the road. No, actually, you can improve, and you can improve, and you can improve. And an even more impressive story, solar PV. This is how the price came down on solar PV from something very expensive, $80 per watt, 80,000 per kilowatt, at a time when wind turbines cost 500. I mean, solar power will never, ever happen. It's more than 100 times expensive than wind. And then over some years, it got down to about 5. So it was reduced by a factor of 16. Wow. And then the Chinese came in and took it down to 25 cents. Fantastic. So that's 300 times cheaper, if you can put it there. You have 1/300 left. Same product, crystalline silicium. It has to stop. Everybody could see that it would stop at 5. No, it didn't stop at 5. During that trajectory, everybody said, now it stops. But it didn't stop. And now my glasses go. Yes. And now we can say, now at least it has stopped. No, it has not. So today's price is not 26 cents, it's 13 cents through industrialization. So that is what I work with in these 3 small companies. One does hydrogen. And hydrogen is done in hydrogen factories. When you do such a factory, a chemical factory, you take your equipment cost and then you add 200% for the site works, the project management, the engineering, the building, what have you. So it costs 3 times the equipment. And then in a very childish way, you can say, why? Why is it like that? Couldn't it be done better? Therefore, we have developed a modular system that cost equipment plus 50% rather than equipment plus 200%. And this is done by a very, very scientific, well-known, highly respected method called blind hand finding a grain. We didn't know any better. Just happened like that. I can make no excuses for the sloppiness of that, but at least this is how it went. And then you can say, yeah, I keep on dreaming 50% on top of the equipment, it will never happen. But this is a US Midwest wind farm. US, because in America, the National Renewable Energy Laboratories annually makes a study of the prices. This is a latest study. The wind turbine equipment, 100%, balance of plant, all the roads, all the foundations, all the cables, all the substation, whatever, 31% on top. Financing, 11%, total, 142%, not 300%. If you can do that in wind, why couldn't you do it here? So you can do it like that. That is a modern 30 megawatt plant done industrially. And here's a video from us delivering such a piece of equipment. It's the second one we are delivering, and is doing it. This is a hydrogen factory coming here, 2 trucks, with the big part on the first truck being unloaded here. next to the early equipment standing beside. And mounting here first, we'll mount the power supply coming in here. And next we mount the auxiliary container that has all the pumps and so on. Total time to build a hydrogen factory, to build any chemical factory, 18 to 24 months? No, 1 week. Because everything was done in a factory. And that is the whole trick. And my best example is, don't have my mobile phone. This one here, let's take that. You all have a mobile phone. I have this one here. Your mobile phone, if you were to have the first mobile phone, the first of your model of the Samsung or the iPhone, the first ever, $10 million. You paid 800 because 1 million are made. This one here has a little radio transmitter that speaks with the receiver there. Somebody comes and tells me, could you please do that? Please make that from scratch. By the way, put in a little laser. Let's see if I can make it. Well, I won't, but like this. Also make a little laser, please. If I started from scratch on that, what would it cost? 1 million? This one here would probably cost you $40 because it's made in a factory. Skyclean is a different proposition, but still relying on this. If we are to meet the 2-degree curve, then we need to not only reduce our emissions, but we also need to have negative emissions. We need to take CO2 out of the air. If we, by some magic, right now, 25 minutes past 6 today, stopped all emissions in the whole world. Booty. Problem gone? Oh no. We know how bad the summers have been the last few years due to climate change. You know about what it does to Australian climate. There's too much CO2 out there, and we need to get it back out again. You can do that with big fans. That's called direct air capture, or you can let plants take it. The big fans, that's kind of smart. You pass air across some substance that absorbs CO2. Pretty straightforward. Then you store the CO2 in big caverns or in old oil fields or whatever. Major problem is there's 5 billion cubic meters of air in the atmosphere. Moving 5 billion cubic meters with fans is truly astronomical task. But let plants do the job. Plants get all their carbon from the atmosphere. And plants is a lot of carbon. If we take our chairs here, this leg here, and that leg also, but now I'm pointing on that, is 50% carbon. And each and every atom of that came from air in the shape of CO2. So plants take in CO2 along with oxygen and nitrogen. They just push that out again. But the CO2, they split into the carbon atom and the 2 oxygen atoms. They cut that bond, throw out the oxygen. That's why I can stand here and talk. That's because plants have done that for billions of years. So they made a lot of oxygen. And then they use solar energy to do that, and they use some more solar energy to convert the carbon into sugars. And with sugars, they can make everything. They can make the lignin and cellulose of the chair leg, and they can make starch like we use in grain for our bread, and they can make sugars for fruits and whatever. But they get it all from atmosphere. And that means that waste from agriculture or forestry also has all of its carbon from the atmosphere. When that is then rotted or burned, it all goes back as CO2. That's a natural cycle. We cheat on that. We don't let it rot or burn. We put it into a pyrolysis furnace. And what a pyrolysis furnace do is to heat it to a high temperature without oxygen being present, 500-600 degrees. If you heat plant material to that temperature, it burns spontaneously, but there's no oxygen, so it can't burn. So what happens is that half of it goes off as a gas. We can use that as a fuel. When we burn that, it of course goes back as CO2 again. But half of the material doesn't want to become a gas. It takes much higher temperature to do that. That goes off as what we call biochar. If it is wood chips, it becomes charcoal. If it is straw, you could call it straw char. If it is manure, you would call it whatever. But the characteristic of that, which is carbon, black carbon in amorphous form, is that no microorganism can eat it. So you can spread it on agricultural soil as a fertilizer, and it stays there for thousands or millions of years. It's a stable form of carbon. And that means that if we want to run the cycle again, since that doesn't go off as CO2, we need some more CO2 from the atmosphere. So we create genuinely carbon negative fuels. We can use any green stuff, wheat, straw, residues from corn or maize, biogas residues, manure, wood chips, waste from oil palm plantations that destroy the jungle. We use all of that. Here's a picture of a 20 megawatt plant we just inaugurated last week. It takes 40,000 tons of dry matter. Sequesters, that's our dryer there, because we take it in wet, our feedstock. That's the furnace. The rest of this is just big shiny pipes that engineers like. But we can take 40,000 tons of feedstock, 25,000 tons becomes black carbon that doesn't go away. 15,000 tons replaces fossil fuels. So it's about 1-to-1, 40,000 tons of feedstock, 40,000 tons of carbon saving. We take here biogas residues, so waste from waste. Finally, in offshore, with floating, you could open up the market tremendously. Offshore at the moment is a big success. By 2050, Europe will have 1/3 to half of its electricity from offshore wind. It's cheaper than fossil energy. Check. But it can only be used on the east coast of the US, Northwest Europe, outside China, a little bit around Australia, a little bit around Korea and Japan. That's about it. If you introduce floating technologies, you can take that almost all over the world. You multiply the available resource by a factor of 10. The challenge is that if you look on the left side, that the floating foundations are made by hand. So if you look at the turbine on the foundation that is made in a dry dock, the tower of a 15 megawatt weighs 1,000 tons and takes 5,000 hours. The floating foundation weighs 4,000 tons, so it takes 20,000 hours, right? No, wrong. Because the tower is made in a factory with its 5,000 hours. The floating foundation that's made in a dry dock doesn't take 20,000 hours, it takes 250,000 hours because it's made by hand. Things need to be made in factories. So that's what you see on the right-hand picture. That's our first demo unit where everything is made in a factory. So what you see on the upper left is the part of the foundation being made in a tower factory, driven on a truck, installed in the port, out on a barge, submerging the barge, installing the turbine, towing it up to site. Everything can be done in a systematic manner. And here it is, off the coast of Norway, with its substructure, 3 big anchor lines, a nice, comfortable day. This is less comfortable, 15-meter wave height from a big storm we had in January. Very, very interesting, but as you can see, operating nicely also under such conditions. Here we have a 20 megawatt along the Eiffel Tower. Interestingly, same weight as the Eiffel Tower, but we can do that in 1 week, where the Eiffel Tower took 2 years. As I always say, just to be sure when I show this picture, it's just a drawing. So don't get disappointed when you get to Paris. I don't want to let you down, it isn't there. We could work together to accelerate the energy transition. You have abundant available resources. I've never before been in a jurisdiction that had the resources you have. You have all the raw materials that could benefit from local value add. You are really a well-established, modern, forward-looking society. We have a long experience in renewable energy innovation. We make technologies that would be suited here, and we have good structures in our foreign department and so on that would like to discuss matters like these. When we want to make big changes, one of our big problems is that middle-aged men have too much power. This is a billboard from the US. This year, thousands of men will die from stubbornness. It's done by the health authorities saying, speaking to men who don't want to go to the doctor when they have blood in their feces, and the wife says, you need to go to the doctor. I had to work it away, you know, I don't go to the doctor. And then there's a famous graffiti here saying how men react to that. So we need some more females in decision making. We could tune our mindset. This is from Chinese, crisis. Chinese is Waiji. Those two signs, danger and opportunity. And finally, on transition, here's a picture from Fifth Avenue in New York on Easter Sunday, the year 1900. And you can play a little game where you say, spot the car. There's a car. Spot the car, please. Very difficult. It's there. There's one car in the picture. And then on Easter Sunday, 1913, it looks like that. And we can play the same game, spot the horse. There's one horse in the picture over there. And that's not because everybody in New York wanted this to happen. Because there were 100,000 people employed with horses, feeding them, driving them, cleaning up after them, selling them, buying them, eating them, or killing them for meat, what have you, trading them. They didn't want this transformation, but it happened still because it was the right thing. So that's what we should aim for, keep up our spirits, even when sometimes it looks a little difficult. Thank you.
Thanks, Henrik. That was amazing. Don't get too comfortable on the stage. The academic in me wants to immediately throw open to questions, but that's not the format. We're going to invite Professor Klinken and our special guest speaker to join me up on the stage, and we'll conduct some Q&A. There will be a couple of roving mics. Yes, I got a thumbs up from the back. It was good that we have the roving mic here. See if I mastered this. Testing. That's coming through? Great. There's a switch and it needs to stop being, yep, it went green. Switch to the top, Peter. Yeah, push that switch up. Oh yeah, you're live. Okay, great. So I'm sure you're all itching to ask questions, but I have a microphone, so I'm going to ask the first one. Peter, I'm going to give Henrik a little rest and throw to you. We just saw a Danish roadmap to wind energy, and some acknowledgement that it's not as simple as it looks necessarily. Given your length of experience looking at this state, what's holding us back, or what's the first step down the path that we could take right now?
I'm not allowed to get political, okay? So I have to be very cautious what I say. Quite seriously, listening to Henrik for the third time today, I've had the pleasure of seeing the data that he's presented. One of the things that just struck me, Henrik said that Denmark, with 0.07% of the world's population, has been able to abate 3.5% of the world's emissions from wind, correct?
You can say that we created the best practice
to do that.
We did not build all the Chinese
No,
turbines.
I understand. But it was, yeah, I get that. But the fundamental principle came from Denmark, and you've had this major contribution. I looked at that and I said, solar panels. Solar panels, Martin Green's discovery in the mid-90s in the University of New South Wales are the solar panels that are used around the world. That's an Australian invention, all right? I would like to do the calculation, or maybe you can do it tonight, Henrik, is to say, well, what proportion of emissions have been abated because of solar panels that came from Australia? I would say it's probably not too dissimilar to Denmark's contribution. The big difference is Australia did not absolutely get into that. The government did not value solar panels. They had real troubles commercialising it. They took it to America, didn't work there. Chinese bought it, and they've mass-produced it. And so we as a country have absolutely missed out on a golden opportunity around sensational technology. I think we were just dumb and naive in the way we approached it. I am cautiously optimistic now that we've got a government at the federal level that is saying, future made in Australia. We need sovereign capability. It is as simple as that. We have seen what's happened with the global pandemic. We've seen what's happened with geopolitical changes. We've seen supply chains being dismantled. If we don't have sovereign capabilities, we are incredibly vulnerable. And so if I am, very passionate about this country using its incredible capabilities. If you go back to the turn of the last century, 1901, when Australia became a federation, 10% of our economy, when we were riding the sheep's back, was in manufacturing, 10%. After the First World War, the Second World War, the Great Depression, Australia said we need sovereign capability. In the mid-60s, 30% of our economy was in manufacturing. What is it today? 10%, right? As we've ridden the resource boom, our manufacturing capability has gone down, right? So we're back at where we were 125 years ago. That is just not acceptable. So this sounding like a real sermon, I'm sorry. But I am very passionate about it because we are incredibly capable. We can do stuff. We are able to generate great new ideas. We just haven't taken advantage of it. I think we drank the Kool-Aid of globalization too much probably in the 1980s. We said we need to open up our economy. Fantastic, all good. But what we've done is we've outsourced everything and we've retained not sufficient manufacturing capability. We can do it. We need to. This is the moment to do that restructuring that Henrik's talked about. The opportunities in front of us are mind-boggling. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reset our economy. If we don't get it right, future generations will look back and say, how did you stuff that up?
Right, thanks, Peter. Henrik, assuming we now follow the path that Peter's laid out and Denmark and Australia are working in vigorous partnership to just open the floodgates of manufacturing in this space, do you see any issues arising in terms of supply, raw material supply, into this rapidly expanding energy transition space?
Yeah, of course there are some. Some are better known than others. In Europe we are concerned about rare earths and we are concerned about copper and steel. And there, of course, you are in that strange position that you actually own a lot of those resources. We're concerned about lithium, but I think that ultimately that problem will be reduced through the introduction of sodium in batteries, which is abundant. So you need, of course, to take the raw material supply seriously, but if there's anybody in the world who needs to take it less seriously or turn rather the challenge into an opportunity, it is Australia.
Can I just follow up on that? I was talking to Henrik about this today. Western Australia is the only jurisdiction in the world. How many people know the periodic table? Heard of the periodic table, right? There are 103 elements in the periodic table. 69 of them are found in WA. 2/3 of all the elements on the planet are found in this jurisdiction. We've got to make the most of it. Instead of just shipping, when I came into this role, I was told we take big rocks, we turn them into little rocks, and we put them on a ship. It's true. That's literally what I was told, right? Instead of saying, okay, I said lithium's going to be a great opportunity. Let's go downstream and start processing and start going towards batteries. We take big rocks, we turn them into little rocks, and we put them on a ship. Duh.
I suppose, I'm probably allowed to be political and say, at the same time we're mothballing lithium and nickel mines in this state. So that sovereign capability piece, I think, needs to be brought into sharper focus somehow through the right policy settings. Maybe I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah. You can. I totally agree with you.
All right. I've been greedy with the time, and I think I'm sensing pent-up desire to ask questions. If you have it, I don't know whether I'm going to get nothing or just a torrent, but if you have a question, could you pop your hand up and a microphone will be delivered into it.
Thanks.
There you go.
Yeah, Chris.
Question for Henrik. I saw on your slide about, right now in Australia, minus some in the wind farm development space, and right now in Australia, conservatively, you're looking at about 3 million a megawatt for CapEx, and you and I know that's way higher than it should be in supply chain and a variety of other issues. And there's no quick solution. And I completely align with Peter and I think probably most people in the room that we should be manufacturing here. That's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years to attract Siemens, Vestas, GE, Enercon, whoever else. From your experience in Denmark, what can we be doing here in Western Australia specifically to bring that capex down? We've got issues in the Middle East. There's tension. Global supply chain issues are not going anywhere anytime soon. Interest rates are impacting prices as well. So yeah, be interested in your view from Denmark and how we could, in the next year or so, reduce that capex.
Yeah, you can say that on the actual capex of building renewables, I think that you are a victim there of a global, or we are all a victim of global fluctuations. And there's not much you can do about that actively here in Western Australia. What you could do is to look at opportunities that are new and where you have, in a way, wide areas or paths that have not yet been trodden. That's what we have tried to do in my little company. When it comes to hydrogen, that's actually an extremely well-known technology, but we have just industrialized it in a more consequent manner than most others. We have looked at pyrolysis. The Romans heated their homes with charcoal, what do they call, little baskets for charcoal. So doing pyrolysis has been known for millennia, but we have been able to do it so that the charcoal is of a quality that you can spread on agricultural soil without any worry about contaminating it with materials that shouldn't be there, and so on. When I look at your opportunities, I think that they fall both within the clear manufacturing space, such as who could be the first to really large-scale deliver direct reduction of iron ore, the equipment for that. Who does that today? Nobody really. It might come up in China if it's a good business, but in not so many years it might be that you can't trade with China, because it could well be that the Americans will say, either you are with us or you are against us. And you cannot there say, we are kind of in between. We'd like to be with you on security, but let's do our own trade and industry policies. We are kind of like gray zone in the middle. And there they might well say no, because trade policies and industrial policies are as much about security as arms are. So either you're with us or against. Are you with us? Because if you're not with us, you're against us. And there I think that is where you come to the sovereign capabilities, and where I think that there are several white spaces where you're uniquely positioned to explore them and see what could we get out of this. Could we have a first mover experience like we had in wind power in my country? And I can assure that is an exhilarating, intoxicating place to be. And I hope that you will find many of such niches that could stop being niches and become mainstream.
Thank you. Any other questions? Here we go, down the front there, and then we'll work our way to the front.
Hi, just a quick question on the waste management side for, those new renewables, especially like solar panels. Currently, apparently, a lot of, parts of them are still going to landfills. So that's an issue from a sustainability perspective. Just wondering how much of that problem poses like as a barrier, and what your views are on that.
I must say that I'm not very familiar with what one needs to do on solar. I know about batteries and about rare earth materials, but not so much about solar panels. But I know it very well from wind. And when wind turbines are decommissioned and recycled, all the metals can be recycled using completely conventional methods. So we all know about steel recycling. A big part of steel production is based on scrap steel. Same goes for copper and so on. So our main challenge there is the blades. And the blades are often used by opponents of renewables or wind power as, but look at that, you have dirt in your own backyard. And that is very much an exaggeration. It is not difficult to recycle blades, also not when they cannot go to landfills. And a very, very simple technology is pyrolysis of the fiberglass. If you heat it up to about 800 degrees, all the resins, all the plastics that were used to glue the fiberglass together evaporates and can be combusted, and you are left with the glass fibers that can be recycled in insulation materials. So there our conscience is much better than, shall we say, talk sometimes indicates. And I see this mainly as there needs to be some hair in the soup, let's find it and point our fingers at it, than an actual problem. But on the sort of fundamentals of your question, I completely agree. You cannot go out and say, here we have a technology of the future without having a recycling plan handy. That's just part of the game.
We had another question just run right front. Oh, we'll keep working our way forwards.
I'm no apologist for the uranium industry, but it strikes me that there will be various parts of the industrialised globe that won't meet this target of net zero anytime soon without nuclear. And Western Australia, South Australia, Northern Territory have serious uranium resources, which currently our state government and the Commonwealth government prohibit us from exporting. I'm just wondering, have you had any reason or opportunity to have a think about the role, if any, that nuclear might have in this endeavour?
Yes, and for me it has been, in Denmark we have a music program that's called X Factor. I don't know if you get that here, but it's, and whenever somebody is kicked out, they always say it has been an incredible journey. So I'll say this has also been for me a journey. When I was back in the 70s, I was very much against nuclear power, seeing it as a centralist, expert-driven bad thing. I have changed my view on that completely. I think that when we fight climate change, we need all horses from the stable, and there I'm completely open for that. There are two main challenges of nuclear. One is time. Just don't have time in the climate game for nuclear. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't build nuclear. It just means that we can't rely on it because it's way too late. And the timing issue is so critical that if people say, yeah, oh yes, we should have nuclear, and therefore we can delay deployment of renewables, that is a dangerous place to be. So you are perfectly entitled to hope that it will become a product going forward, but it should not have any detrimental effect on renewables. If we look at the actual fact of the game, in 2023, the world installed about 510 gigawatts of renewables, and it installed -2 gigawatts of nuclear, or rather installed more, but the retirements were so much bigger than installments that the addition was -2, and in renewables it was, as I said, 510. And that means that to some extent, the global society has chosen a path that delivers the goods sooner. The other thing is the cost. Whenever you look at costing, at least in my part of the world, you end up even looking at small modular reactors and so on at being, if you look at it kind of like a hierarchy, renewables cheap, fossils medium, nuclear expensive. In some countries, nuclear power can now be bought really cheap, but that's because the works were paid for by the government, who never recovered their investment, and now they're running on marginal costs. But I don't like the notion of moratoria against resource use or it's forbidden to test this or that. I think that we need to keep an open mind on it. I'm just concerned about the timing issue. And if a position could be, no, we need to do nuclear and therefore we don't have to do renewables, that would never work. We simply don't have time for that.
Peter, did you want to add anything?
Without being political.
Well, I appreciate that's a challenge. Yeah.
No, I totally agree with Henrik. We're facing an existential threat here.
Yes.
All right? Everything needs to be on the table. You need to evaluate them all carefully and in a calm, considered manner instead of screaming at each other. All right? That's a novel concept at times. And say, well, what is the best way forward? Right? And, nuclear certainly doesn't produce carbon emissions, right? The challenge, as Henrik said, it's the time and it's the cost and the possibility that you will do it at the expense of going through renewables. So I think those three issues that I would really struggle with.
Great, thank you both. Next question's right in front there.
Yeah, thank you. I just really wanted to go back and visit the first question. And the first question that I heard was from yourself, Mark, which was what's stopping us, and wasn't quite answered. However political it may be, but it's, I don't know if we've actually got the context right. So I just want to really maybe add a little bit of context and share a bit of my thinking. So when I hear the word, what's stopping us, we kind of think of the driver being climate change. Why aren't we making a cleaner planet and having clean energy? And then we look at WA as a state, and we look at energy security being the foundation of economic security and a prosperous society. And if you look at WA as energy security, all refineries have collapsed. If you go back 15, 20 years ago, we had about 18 odd refineries where we stocked crude and we could refine it, and we could have the 90 days as per the OECD requirement to have a safe economy. And now we've got two which are bankrupt on the East Coast, and we're struggling there. So we're not really in the OECD. We're just fooling ourselves, really, that we can count oil and refined products on the ocean as energy security. But this world of a just-in-time world just ain't going to work. We're going to go to collapse very, very quickly. So when we talk about what's stopping us, I think the real question is going to be, because coal's going to we know coal's going to collapse. So we're at 6 gig at the moment. We're going to drop 2 gig. Then all of a sudden, we're going to have a electricity shortage, and we've got a shortage of gas. All the gas majors have run away. They're not investing. We've not invested in LNG for like 20 years here. The Bunbury natural gas pipeline, I don't know why we call it that, because it doesn't flow gas from Dampier anymore. And even the Perth Basin isn't going to provide enough gas in the interim to actually get us out of this rut that we're in. So the question that we're going to be asking ourselves, what's stopping us? The question is, when we actually realize we don't have the energy, it's what's stopping us to replacing that energy, and it's replacing that energy to save the economy and to save where we want to be. And it's, time's running out. Time's running out. It's not just climate, but it's for the economy as well and the people here. So there's two.
So was it a statement or a question?
It's a statement, but I want to go back to what is stopping us.
Well, okay.
Because
from my perspective,
we need to go back to that question, because
so
we're not.
There are a couple of guys sitting
moving
very close to you that I've been discussing this with a lot. It really worries me. We've got a clear vision that says we want to get to net zero by 2050. We want to shut down coal by 2030. What else? Right? So we have got a big jump with just one step along the way at 2030. This is the biggest energy transition that we are going to be experiencing as humans in the most condensed time. And I don't think we've actually got the steps really sorted out. We don't have them very well structured. I don't see Gantt charts that say at this point we're going to be turning off, we turn off coal, but I don't see when we've got enough renewables in place, we've got enough batteries in place, we can't do pumped hydro. What are we doing for long duration energy storage? So you're going to have gas turbines that are going to have to be cranked up. So we've got a vision, but I don't see all the different steps put really in place. And I think that's something that we as a state really need. It's great that we want to become a renewable energy superpower. I think that's a fantastic aspiration. Well, how are we going to get there? What are the actual steps to do that? One, we need energy security locally, just for this and for our industry. Two, how do we actually grow it so that we can do the things that Henrik's talking about, doing, DRI, making green ammonia and so on. So personally, I don't think we have actually got those steps really well mapped out so that you can actually say, this is where we're at to, this is where and measure yourself along the way. It has been a really slow, tortuous rollout of, sorry, did someone chuckle, right? Okay. It has been a painful journey to actually get this, this whole thing moving. And time is of the essence. We haven't got time to sit around cogitating. And one of the real problems is around the regulatory system. We're spending an inordinate amount of time navel-gazing and not actually getting on and doing stuff. So these are the sorts of things that we just have to get better at because we're going to be left behind. And Henrik says, look at the cards that you guys have got. I say that we're playing an international game of poker, right? We're sitting around the table. We've got a pile of money in front of us. We're feeling really good. And we've pulled up our cards. And, holy, look at this. Look at all those aces we've got. And we're going, oh, do we actually want to bet or don't we? Someone might have a royal flush. It's too late. We don't put our bets down. Someone with a pair of twos has just gone past us, right? And we've missed out. So, we've got to crack on. Sorry.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question or not?
It sounds like we were both with the same spirits.
Right, now time is of the essence, but, now there's hands shooting up everywhere. The first hand I saw was right at the back. Yep, that's you. There's no one behind you, I don't think. I think I've got two more after this. I saw hands and that'll have to be it.
Stand up because I hate not being able to see people when they're talking. I'm Tracy Lefroy. I'm a farmer, a landowner, and I'm also Shire President of a regional community, which is going to be hosting the infrastructure for a fair proportion of the renewable energy transition. And I completely agree. There's these almost motherhood statements coming to us about what renewable energy transition will mean, what targets we're setting. And it is a painful journey, particularly for those of us in the regions who are being approached by numerous proponents over time, talking to us about our land. And what I would like to know is what's the framework, what's the policy and what's the support in place to help these regional communities that are going to undergo mammoth transitions as part of the regional energy transition. So I'm glad to see, I think Jess may have just left, but can you sort of elaborate on how regional communities can be more meaningfully engaged, not just as hosts, but also as partners in shaping the solutions for renewable energy? And how do we ensure there was talk about the sharing benefits in a tangible and equitable way? And I would love to see a roadmap, a framework, a policy setting that actually supports this outcome.
Why me, Lord? Why me? I got to be non-political here, right?
Good luck.
I agree with you. No, it gets back to fundamental human nature of talking to each other and explaining things well and not making assumptions. I think there's been an assumption, we want to go renewables, therefore let's just crack on. Instead of going, what are the actual consequences? What do we actually need to do? Let's have a yarn with the people and work out the steps that are necessary. Henrik, I'd be very interested to know, how did that play out in Denmark when you were starting off and you were starting to get the wind turbines? You must have had to put some up in farms, and there would have been people, I'm not having that there. What was the experience there?
It was actually quite easy in the early years. There's always been a very positive sentiment about wind power and certain pride in that we were forward-looking and so on. In later years, it of course became more difficult because the landscape sometimes got to be significantly influenced by turbines. For part of the journey, we had communities that owned the turbines, and the fact that the communities owned always made life easier. But the way it is constructed now is that if you want to build a new wind or solar farm, you need to offer the local community a certain proportion of the shares in your project. And thereby you get local co-ownership. And since they don't build projects that are not profitable, you generally get a good return on your investment. And that helps a lot because it respects people and it gives them equal opportunities, so to speak. I think that's a smart thing. Sometimes the developers didn't like it. They can be incredibly greedy, but it's still the right thing.
They're not like here in Australia. No. Actually, can I just make a plug here? Because Peter Ashworth, who's not here, or you're just about to say that. Yeah. So the Centre for the Energy Transition at Curtin University is doing precisely this, looking at, well, how do we engage the community and make sure we bring everyone along, right? To me, one of the real worries about the whole energy transition is that it needs to be a just transition and that it's not a bunch of people going to be incredibly wealthy out of all of this and there's a whole bunch of people who are going to miss out. Right? That is absolutely anathema to me and absolutely unacceptable. We are a very wealthy jurisdiction that needs to make sure we bring everybody along on this journey.
And I was going to say, there are many ways in which I can't replace Peter, but this strikes to the very heart of where I cannot replace Peter. That's the core of her expertise. So it would be good to encourage that dialogue to happen. Now, I had two more hands. One was there, the gentleman there. You might need to put that hand up higher to be, there you go. And there's one more over here, and then we'll have to call stumps.
Thanks, Henrik, for an excellent presentation. I'm a little biased here. One of the, I guess, natural endowments that Western Australia and Australia has is a significant wave resource. I'd like to hear your thoughts on, what you think of wave in terms of seasonal benefits to a deep renewable energy system, and I guess how, if you did think that, how the state should be trying to capitalise on that.
And what was it? Wave technology. I have to be honest, it will never happen. And the reason is not, it's not based on a thorough technical analysis, it's based on observation. When I started in wind, there was talk about renewables in Denmark, and it was wind, wave, solar, geothermal. Of those, wind and solar succeeded, solar much later, wind spectacularly. There were many people working on wave, but as we sit here and talk, there's no commercial wave system in operation in Denmark. After this was kind of heralded as one of the four mainstays in 1975. So that is almost 50 years ago. And then you can ask, were the people in wave power particularly stupid or non-funded or whatever? And of course they were not. They were on the same normal distribution as everybody is, on creativity and intelligence and entrepreneurship or whatever. But the problem is that it is just so difficult to do. It's very, very difficult to do wave power that will deliver at competitive cost and still survive the one-off events of very harsh conditions. And there are other technologies like that also were believed by people involved to have a bright future. Tidal power with subsea turbines in waters with high tidal flows. Airborne wind turbines. There have been many projects with kites and other things where you would expect to do really cheap power. And all of them basically have come to nothing, because what they ventured on was just so much more difficult than the more simple wind or solar installations. Solar thermal, where you used parabolic mirrors to heat substances like oils or low melting point metals or things like that, salts, have actually been executed and are dying again because it's just too difficult. You cannot beat the economy of the by now incumbent technologies. So the harsh and rough and undesired message is that I wouldn't stake my hopes on that. I don't think it will work, because there is, as we sit here and talk, after 50 years, not one commercial company that is successfully deploying wave power technology in the world.
Can I just segue there and ask, well, the one that you didn't talk about was geothermal. What's your thoughts there?
Oh, geothermal will come, but it will mainly be for heating purposes, except in certain particularly well-served places in the world. Iceland, New Zealand, you may have some in Australia, I must admit, I don't know. But other than that, it is very difficult. There are some technologies coming up that are quite interesting, which are called very, shall we say, low-key, deep technologies where you drill 10 kilometers into the ground. And Iceland, that is otherwise very well served, have a very good technology stage, and they are going into these technologies. And they might, over time, become commercial, where you could actually do power, even if you don't have volcanic activity in the neighborhood. But we just don't have time. That is the problem. I support all developments. I'm also in favor of wave power, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that due to this time restriction, we need to focus on deployment of technologies we know and take everything else as a sugaring on the cake, a positive thing. We like it, nuclear, wave power, geothermal, whatever, but it's solar and wind and biomass. They are the ones that will drive the green transition.
Great. We'll take one last question, hopefully with a cheery, optimistic answer.
Thank you so much, Henrik, for coming here and doing the presentations. I got technical questions, non-political. From your slides about the energy compositions, you get like wind and then sun and also like biomass. And two questions, some of questions already answered about the tidal and geothermals. My question is, why do you have to combine solar and also wind together? And second one is, what is going to be your equilibrium, our sweet spot of all these energies that are available for us, including oil and gas and coal, and also nuclear and all the other stuff? What is the sweet spot that you want to achieve, whether it's from the sun, solar, and everything? Because definitely we cannot just replace 100% oil and gas and coal, but you want to achieve something that you're probably happy with that. What is the point of that?
Your first question was, when we do methanol, for instance, why do we have both wind and solar? Simple answer, we don't. It's for graphic reasons that I showed both as being candidates for that. So you can do methanol just on the basis of some hydrogen that's made with solar and some green carbon. You can do it with hydrogen made from wind and some green carbon. You always need the green carbon, you always need the hydrogen. Regarding the sweet spot, I don't agree with you that we will always need the fossils. I think my time, and in a way you asked, what do I want? In a way, I want climate change mitigation by the means that it takes. And I try not to be ideological about it. Unlike my political counterparts here, I try to keep a clean slate on that. But I don't think we will need coal. I think coal and fracked gas shouldn't be permitted, because I think that the pollution per generated energy is just too high. And I don't think it's necessary. I fully agree that there will be a need for fossils on other aspects. And for instance, you can ask yourself, we had a discussion earlier today about sustainable aviation fuel. In Europe, there's a big focus on sustainable aviation fuel. With that, they mean fuel that has non-fossil oil in it. And a jet fuel, Jet A1, is a mix of many, many things. We want to replace that with something biogenic. That is going to be difficult and expensive. You could do something else. You could look at what is called the aromatic content of fossil oil. Aromatics are when you have your carbon chains and then you have a hexagon of carbon atoms in what's called a benzene ring. That's an aromatic element. Aromatics have a certain lubrication effect. So in old style jet engines before 1990 or thereabouts, you need some aromatics in the fuel. In modern engines, you don't. You can burn without them because you don't need them for lubrication purposes. The bad thing about the aromatics is that they are the ones creating the soot of your fuel, and the soot is acting like condensation kernels at high altitudes. So the white stripes behind the aircraft are almost exclusively due to the combustion of the aromatics, not all the other carbon substances in the fuel. By adding green hydrogen to fossil jet fuel, you can decompose some of these aromatics so that they stop being aromatic. And thereby you could add green hydrogen to a fossil fuel and make a much cleaner combustion when it comes to the stripes. And for aircraft, the climate effect, there's some discussion, is on the order of 30 to 50% from CO2, 70 to 50% from the white stripes that act like a pillow or a greenhouse shield and helps heat. Let's get rid of those. That might be a better use of our resources than trying to make totally clean aviation fuels and then start sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. So I fully agree with you that there is a mix, but I don't think that mix includes the worst of the contaminants. I think it includes more of course, a huge proportion of renewables, and then some clean gas, some clean oil, and us doing something about those to make them even cleaner.
So what do you think about CCUS then?
I think that CCS is a good thing while we turn down fossils, but it is to some extent a very expensive way. It's much more expensive to do fossils and carbon capture and storage than it is to do renewables. CCUS, I don't like that. The U means carbon capture and utilization. I don't like if it is fossil, because then we get the emissions anyway. We use it maybe twice, but we still get the emissions. We cannot afford to have more fossil emissions than the bare minimum. Our carbon budget doesn't allow us to do that. And there I think that what you should do is that you should capture all the fossil carbon you can, but you shouldn't allow it to go into products that are then combusted again. I think that's a bad track, because then we still get the emissions.
Thank you so much.
All right, we are a touch over time. I was saying to Henrik in the food and drink session prior that Perth's obviously the best place in the world to live, but we are a touch geographically isolated. So we get very excited when international visitors come by and are willing to talk to us. This has been a wonderful opportunity to have that international context combined with the profound knowledge of our local context from our chief scientist.
Highly political, of course.
Apolitical, as I was going with Peter.
That's what I meant to be.
Yeah. And for all of you to have come out to this event at such short notice is deeply appreciated. So there is food and drink back where you were before for another 45 minutes. I've cut into your hour, so apologies, but I think it was well worth it. Could you just please join me in thanking Henrik and Peter for the... Please go and enjoy the food and drink. And